morning. We are in our series on the book of Esther, and we're in chapter 2. Esther is in the Old Testament, and what's really fascinating about the book is we can follow the historical records about King Xerxes, who's obviously a real king and a real time in Persia, and the Bible insight is so fascinating to what happens with this amazing woman, Esther. And last week, we opened the series in chapter 1, and we heard that King Ahasuerus, who is King Xerxes, so he's called Ahasuerus in this translation because that is the Hebrew name of that king, but it is King Xerxes of history. He throws this lavish 6-month party. It's just unbelievable display of wealth. And at the pinnacle of that celebration that he has to show off how amazing and powerful he is, he calls Queen Vashti to come before all these important people to show how beautiful his queen is, and she refuses to go, and he is furious. She is deposed as queen, and it opens up this opportunity for a new queen. And we come into Esther chapter 2 now, and we're going to see what happens, and we are going to get introduced to the main character, Esther. So the first 11 verses of chapter 2 say this: After these things, after what's just happened with this banquet and deposing of Vashti, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's young men who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the citadel, under the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given to them, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." They're suggesting you need to find a new queen. This pleased the king, and so he did so. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, a new character, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. So when the Israelites, they got taken away into captivity, he was part of that. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle. So it's his cousin, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was beautiful to look at. And when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Hegai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor. And he quickly provided her with cosmetics and a portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known her people or her kindred, so she didn't disclose her Jewish heritage, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem and to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. That's quite a lot of verses there, but it just really brings us into the story and introduces these characters. Let's pray as we look at this morning. Lord, I just thank you for your word. Thank you for this amazing woman, Esther. And as we just dig into this chapter this morning, really pray you would speak to us, open up our hearts to what you want to say to us. In Jesus' name, amen. In 2016, actor Jim Carrey, he had to introduce the nominees for the Best Picture Comedy at the Golden Globes. And this is what he looked like in 2016. This is 2016 Jim Carrey with a nice beard. And what happens is this voiceover introduces him and says, "And to present the award, please welcome 2-time Golden Globe winner Jim Carrey." And Jim Carrey comes up onto the stage And this is what he says. This is his preamble as he introduces these nominees. He says, "Thank you. I am two-time Golden Globe winner, Jim Carrey. You know, when I'm going to sleep at night, I'm not just a guy going to sleep. I am two-time Golden Globe winner, Jim Carrey, going to sleep and getting some well-needed shut-eye. And when I dream, I don't just dream ordinary dreams. No, sir. I dream about being three-time Golden Globe winner, Jim Carrey, because then I would be enough. It'd finally be true. I could stop this terrible search for what I know ultimately won't fulfill me." And he says, "But you know, these awards are really important." And he kind of goes on to introduce the nominees. And it's just this humorous introduction, but it's funny because it's so true and it's so cutting. It's this critique on the futility of searching for awards and recognition to make yourself feel enough, and yet he's actually doing that at an awards ceremony. And it's really, really funny the way he does it. But you know, we often find that in life. There's this search for, I love the way he says, then if I get 3 Golden Globes, I'll finally be enough. That will fulfill me. That'll be all I need. I'll be 3-time Golden Globe winner, Jim Carrey. But we all know there's a 4th to be won and a 5th. It's never enough. It's never going to make you feel worthy or enough or complete. There's always more. And it's this sense of searching for that. And here in Esther chapter 2, there's actually a gap of several years between chapter 1 and chapter 2. And we know history tells us that King Ahasuerus, King Xerxes in history, he went off to war against Greece and he was humiliated and defeated. That happened. It doesn't say that in the text, but most scholars think that would have been that time period in between these chapters. That's what would have happened. So he's a king, he's licking his wounds, he's looking for distraction. And it's a bit like Jim Carrey's speech. It's like, it almost get this picture of the king like he's searching for something to be enough. He's just displayed all his wealth. He's been disrespected and humiliated by Vashti. Now he's gone to war against Greece. He's lost. He's come back and he's feeling like, I need something I need this comfort. I've got this restlessness. I want to fill this void. And verse 1 tells us that he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. I actually wonder, it doesn't say this explicitly, but I wonder whether he remembered her in that sense that he missed Vashti, or he's feeling low and he just remembers her and he remembers what she did. So his advisors say, look, why don't you gather all the beautiful young virgins from across the whole of your empire, this whole vast empire, give them beauty treatments and choose the one which pleases you most to be your new queen. And he likes that idea and he goes with it. And then, as the story unfolds, as we just heard, we're about to meet Esther in a moment. But firstly, Mordecai comes onto the scene. We're told that he's the son of Jair, of Shimei, of Kish, and he's a Benjaminite. It's hard to say that. Benjaminite. So he gets introduced, this character, Mordecai. And I just want to drop this in here because this is going to come into the next chapter when we look at chapter 3 in a few weeks' time. And it is the fact that when the original hearers would have read this, the name Kish and the fact that he's a Benjaminite would have really, really stood out to them. And it can get easily missed when we read it. We think, oh, it's just giving a bit of background, his lineages, but it's very important. He's linked with the same tribe as King Saul. Remember, King Saul was Israel's first king, and he is son of Kish, and he is a Benjaminite, and it links Mordecai with Saul in some way. There's this little thing that would create a thought and a connection there. And in chapter 3, we're going to get introduced to the villain of the story, Haman. And when Haman is introduced, we hear about his lineage, and there's a link between Haman's line and the King Saul. So Mordecai has this, but we'll kind of tuck that away, and we'll come back to that. But when Mordecai is introduced, that is going to get flagged up. We're told that he's one of God's people carried away into exile. He's in this foreign land, and he's the guardian of his younger orphaned cousin, whose Hebrew name is Hadassah, and whose Persian name is Esther. And the book of Esther is about this amazing woman. And Both of her parents have died. Mordecai has taken her as his own daughter. And we're told several times in this chapter if you read it. So there's something really important. The author wants us to know that there's a strong bond here. Mordecai he's like a father to her. And there's this interesting tension already that's introduced here. She has a Hebrew name, but she takes her Persian name throughout the book. And Christopher Ash, theologian, he highlights that this is a sign of her struggle of identity. Will she be identified with God's people and take on name Hadassah? Or will she be associated with the empire and take on this name Esther? It's like this conflict. But her Jewish origins are a key part of this story as it's going to unfold. It's going to be, it's already this tension that's set up around her identity. And she makes a decision, the decision is made for her to be called Esther. And the reason is explained in verse 10. No, I haven't got that on the screen, forget that. So Esther had not made known her people or her kindred, we just read this before, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. So we don't know why, but Mordecai says, don't tell anyone about your Jewish roots and origins. So she takes on this name, Esther. And one of the interesting dynamics of the book of Esther is that the characters do different things throughout. They make decisions, we're told what they do, but we're not told whether it was morally right or wrong. We're just told factually, this happened, this person does this person does that. And it could be argued that Mordecai's been deceptive in trying to hide her Jewish origins. He's not being authentic about it or genuine. He's saying, don't tell anyone who you really are. Suppress that, hide that. And we know that is key to the story. It brings about one of the turnarounds and the amazing turnaround later in the book, and it shapes the book. But it's not really said whether it's morally right or wrong. We're just told that he does that. As the story unfolds, we just read that Esther gets chosen to be part of King Ahasuerus' harem, and he's as a candidate to become the new queen. And we're told in verse 7 that she is introduced, that she's beautiful. We're told that. But I think that the text gives us a bigger reason why she was chosen, because clearly being beautiful helped in this scenario. But in verse 8 to 9, it says this. So she's chosen. She's put in the custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor. I think that's so important in this book. And it's incredibly important, this word that is translated won his favor. And it's the Hebrew word hesed. And hesed means grace, favor, mercy, kindness. So she won his kindness, she won his favor, his mercy. Yes, she was beautiful, but so were all of the other women that were chosen. That was a prerequisite to be part of this contest. But she had more than just her physical attributes and her talent or any of those things. This favor seems to surpass human effort. And it's this grace. She's graced. Has this grace upon her life. And it actually reminds me of a story in Genesis chapter 39 when we read about Joseph. And it's actually the same word. The Lord was with Joseph, it says there, and showed him steadfast love, showed him hesed, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And it's the same kind of scenario. He's in a really bad situation, Joseph. Gets sold into slavery by his brothers. He's imprisoned, but God gives him this hesed. Has God's grace, his mercy, his favor. It almost seems like unearned. God places this on his life. So Esther is chosen and has this favor and grace and has 12 months of beauty treatments. So that would have been, I don't know, people like going to spas and things like that. It's not really my kind of thing. I would hate to kind of have all these things. I don't mind sitting in a jacuzzi, but I don't want like massages, putting all this stuff. And maybe I'm sure she would have had an amazing time. Would have helped her skin, complexion, beautiful, brilliant. But the thing about this selection process for the new queen is it actually exposes the darkness of this empire. It isn't a fun beauty contest. It's not like the latest reality TV show or, all these people on this island and you get chosen and it's just so fun and amazing and dynamic. It's not like blind date, the old 80s, 90s thing, the choice is yours. It's not this kind of fun moment, because each of these women had to have sex with the king. That was part of what they had to do and were forced to do. So it's actually not a nice part of the story. And it's a moment of compromise for Esther, who is forced to sleep with this pagan king, despite her Jewish roots. And it's another example. Again, we're told factually what happened, but there's no moral explanation. We're not helped in that way. It's just the facts of this story are laid out for us, and we have to weigh that up ourselves. Did God raise her up to this position to have to do that? Was it necessary part of her task to save her people, which, as we see as the story unfolded, will? Or is she a victim of the circumstances of being part of a dark empire in the place that she's in? We're not told the answers. And it's just one of those things we have to really wrestle with. My sense is that God did bestow his favor on her. He did raise her up. But she was in a really, really dark place in that empire. And it isn't a good thing that happened to her. And it is a difficult thing to grapple with. And again, it reminds me of Joseph. Joseph gets sold by his brothers into slavery. He's in prison, and he kind of goes on this really crazy, intense journey. And it wasn't a good thing that happened to him. They were bad things, but God was with him in the midst of his enslavement. God gave him this favor and grace in the midst of it. And I think for us, as we read these stories and read about Esther, we may have felt powerless or trapped or, harmed in some way. And I think it's really important to say God is not the author of that evil. God does not approve of it. And yet, even in those dark, unjust places, he doesn't abandon his people. It's not an easy thing to wrestle with. We see throughout the Bible. Even think of the Apostle Paul. He had so many terrible things. He was just, whipped, abused, so put in prison. God was with him. God favored and graced him. And for us, as we wrestle with the things that have happened to us in our own life, it might bring up things for us this morning. So I just want to encourage you that we'd love to pray for you at the end. There's no easy answers for these things, but we'd love to stand alongside you and pray with that. And, there's this often as well, this natural tendency to categorize Bible characters. You think there's goodies and there's baddies. You've got Moses, he's a goodie. Pharaoh is a baddie. You've got David and Saul. Saul's a baddie, David's a goodie. Joseph and his brothers, we talked about them. But really, in Esther in particular, the story has these layers and complexities around the characters. Like Esther's forced to do things that aren't good. They make choices as well that maybe aren't necessarily right or morally right as well. And yes, they are heroes, but as scholar Barry Webb says, they may be heroes, but they are at best heroes of questionable morality and orthodoxy. So it sounds really harsh, but he's kind of saying that not everything they do is morally right, and not everything fits into the orthodox system, Jewish system that they were a part of and that they was part of who they are. And it is really important for us to not put these characters on a pedestal and create moral lessons from their actions, like, do what Esther does, be like Esther, because really, I think the Bible is so clear that it presents humans as flawed instruments in God's hands. That's all of us. Think about Abraham, what a hero. Abraham lied twice, probably loads of times. Jacob deceived. David committed adultery and murder. He's clearly a hero in the Bible. Gideon built an idol, and the list goes on. So as we read Esther, I think we want to see what God does through these people, but they're not what the story ultimately points to. I think it's really important for us to hold that as we journey through this book. So Esther is taken into the king's palace, and the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor, hesed. She won hesed. Oh yeah, put that in brackets there. That's that word. In his sight, more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So Esther gets raised up. She's queen of this entire Persian empire, and a feast is held in her honor. And then the chapter ends. We didn't get to read this, but we'll read the last little bit now. And this is how chapter 2 ends. I want us to dig into what this means for us, but this is how the chapter ends. In those days, so she's queen, she's been raised up, and in those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. And when the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So Mordecai uncovers this plot to assassinate King Xerxes, King Ahasuerus, and it almost seems like a little tag on at the end of the chapter, like loads has already happened, Esther's been introduced, has been raised up, she's been made queen. Then he gives us this little story at the end, and it's sort of kind of seem like, why is this tagged on? And it could just be an interesting story to give us more of an insight into Mordecai. But as the story unfolds, we'll see that this quiet discovery is actually a pivotal moment in the story. So it's another one of those things we put and we took it away. It's going to come back later in the story. And Mordecai seems to get no real decent recognition for what he did. He's just done something amazing. He just saved the king's life. Wow, he's just saved his life. What does he get? Oh, his good deed gets recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Maybe that is a great thing to receive, but it feels a little bit like he gets forgotten in this moment. So when we dig into the Bible, dig into this scripture this morning, I want us to ask the question that I always want to ask is, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for us right now in our times? What could God be saying to us through Esther chapter 2 this morning? And I believe there's a couple of encouraging things that we can take away from this morning. So firstly, I think God is speaking to us as I'm praying to this. I really felt God saying that it calls us to trust God in messy situations. And life isn't always morally clear-cut. And honestly, I'm the kind of person that I'm a bit of a peacemaker. I like things to be smooth. I like to sort of choose the path of least resistance in life. That's my kind of general way I lean to. But life is not easy. Life is not straightforward. Life is challenging. It is tough. We live in an imperfect world, and a world that can be hostile towards us, especially to our inner seas. I just want to have this calm sea in my soul, and it gets rough seas. These things come, but the world can feel hostile. But like it was for Mordecai and Esther, living as God's people in a dark, like they lived as God's people in a dark place in the Persian Empire. We face uncertain times, but I believe this story and this chapter encourages us to trust God in those dark places, to trust God in those difficult situations, and it encourages us that God is working behind the scenes. God is moving, and we've said before in this story, God is not mentioned, but we know that God is moving behind the scenes. So I believe God is encouraging us in that, to trust him. Secondly, it calls us to look for opportunities to show faithful kindness. And I just really love this little story that gets tagged on at the end about Mordecai, because he sticks his neck out for what is right. And there was a risk there. These guys could have found out that he was going to snitch on them, and they could have come around and taken him out first. But he took a risk, and he did the right thing. But what reward did he get? He just saved the king's life, but it just gets written in a book. And you think, oh man, I thought I might get a bit more than that. But he does it. And it may feel like that in life sometimes. You do the right thing, but you don't get any reward for it. You don't get any recognition for it. You step out, you sacrifice. You do the right thing. But I just love how the story plays out, because this act of faithfulness is going to be this catalyst to this amazing turnaround later on in the story. And it just really brought to mind Galatians 6, 9 to 10. I actually don't think I put this on the screen either. No, I didn't. It says in Galatians 6, let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are in the household of faith. I just believe that's a real encouragement this morning. I said that it's not good. It's not really necessarily our call to make moral lessons out of, be like Mordecai. So I'm kind of doing that with this story. But what I'm really talking about is how God is moving in a situation. God calls Mordecai to be faithful in the little things, and it feels like he misses out on any reward. But the encouragement is God is saying, just stay in that place of doing good. Do not get weary of doing good. And it can feel like discouraging sometimes. Maybe in your workplace, you feel like, I'm trying to act with integrity here. I'm trying to do the right thing. Whereas other people like talking behind people's backs, trying to get ahead, this backbiting. You kind of feel like, why is that person getting ahead? I'm trying to act with integrity and purity of heart. But I just really believe the encouragement is, do not get weary of doing good, because in due time you will reap. It just says you will reap. I think it means reap, the harvest of righteousness. And I was also thinking about family as well. Sometimes have family tensions, don't you? Or you always feel like, why do I have to be the one that says sorry? Or why does someone get to send me a harsh message and I have to be very gracious with my reply? You can feel discouraged in life. But let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. And finally this morning, I just really believe this chapter causes us just to depend on God's grace. I just love that word hesed. It causes us to see the providential hand of God in this. God put his favor on Esther. And whatever we do in life, it can be great to do things out of our own strength and our own effort. But I just believe that'll only get us so far. God is the one that brings the increase. Esther 2 shows us this unearned favor, this grace of God on someone's life. I just think that's an amazing encouragement. Whatever you're doing in life, maybe it is in the workplace where you feel like I'm being faithful. God puts his grace, his favor on you in those things. I believe it's an encouragement for that, but really the bigger encouragement is just the grace of Jesus on our lives. Remember, we just fall upon his grace again and again. The hesed of Jesus, his loving kindness, his mercy, his goodness towards us, which is always there in abundance. I think this chapter really brings us back to that place again. And as we close this morning, we're going to take communion together.